You can't be serious, Dad, I said, my voice trembling as I stared at him across his massive mahogany desk. My father leaned back in his leather chair, calm and composed as always, and let out a slow exhale. This is not up for discussion, Catherine, he said, setting his cigar in the ashtray like the conversation was already over. My fists clenched at my sides, but I refused to back down. So that's it? I asked, my words sharp. You'd rather hand everything over to Grant, someone who doesn't even care, than let me prove myself? All because I'm a woman? He didn't even flinch. This firm is for your brother to manage, Catherine, he said firmly. You've done well with your education, and you'll make a fine wife one day, but this is not your place. My name is Catherine Mercer. I'm 26 years old, a Harvard-educated lawyer, and the daughter of Henry Mercer, owner of Mercer and Associates, one of the most powerful law firms in Dallas. My entire life has been about proving myself, excelling in school, debating my way to the top, graduating with honors, so I could follow in my father's footsteps. But standing there in his office, surrounded by the smell of leather and cigars, I felt my world shift. It didn't matter how hard I worked or how much I loved the law. To him, I was just his daughter, someone who was supposed to marry well and stay out of the way. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steadier now. Grant doesn't care about this firm, Dad. He's reckless, he barely scraped through community college, and he has no idea how to run a business. You know that as well as I do. My father sighed, rubbing his temple like I was the one being unreasonable. Grant will learn. He's my son, Catherine. It's his birthright to take over Mercer and Associates. And you, he paused, his voice softening just slightly. You have other options. A future that doesn't involve the stress of running a firm. I'm protecting you. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. Protecting me? I said, shaking my head. You're not protecting me, Dad. You're holding me back. I've earned this. I've worked harder than anyone, including Grant, and you know it. But you won't even give me a chance because you're too stuck in your ways to see what I'm capable of. His expression hardened, and I knew I'd pushed too far. That's enough, Catherine, he said, his voice sharp. We're done here. I stormed out of his office, my heels echoing through the marble halls of our family's estate. My mother was in the parlor, quietly arranging flowers in a vase. She looked up as I passed, her expression soft but tired. Catherine, she said gently. What happened? I stopped, turning to her with a mix of frustration and desperation. He won't let me work at the firm, I said, my voice breaking. He's handing everything over to Grant, and he expects me to smile and accept it. She sighed, her hand stilling over the flowers. Your father, he has his ways, she said, her tone hesitant. But maybe it's best not to push him, dear. He means well. I stared at her, stunned. Means well? I repeated. Mom, he's throwing away everything I've worked for because I'm a woman. How can you stand there and defend that? She lowered her gaze, and I could see the years of quiet submission etched into her face. I just don't want to see you hurt, Catherine, she said softly. Sometimes it's easier to let things be. Her words hung in the air, and I realized in that moment that I was on my own. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of my father's words pressed down on me. I thought about everything I'd done to get to this point. Late nights poring over case law, the endless debates at Harvard, the sacrifices I'd made to live up to the Mercer name. And for what? To be told I didn't belong? That my only value was to marry into another powerful family? The thought made my stomach turn. The next morning I was halfway through packing my suitcase when the door to my bedroom creaked open. My mother stood there, her face pale and confused. Catherine, what are you doing? She asked, her voice laced with worry. Before I could answer, my father appeared behind her, his brows furrowed in irritation. What's all this? He demanded, stepping into the room. Where do you think you're going? Grant showed up last, leaning casually against the doorframe, still in his robe. Packing for a vacation, sis? He asked with a smirk. I snapped the suitcase shut and stood tall, facing them all. I'm leaving, I said simply, Since I'm not welcome at the firm and apparently don't belong in this family's plans, I'm going to find a place where I do. My father's face darkened, and my mother clutched her pearls, looking like she was about to cry. Catherine, she said softly, don't do this. Let's talk about it. But I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. There's nothing to talk about. You've all made your priorities clear. My father's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer. Don't be ridiculous, Catherine, he said, his tone cold and dismissive. This is your home. Where else would you go? And for what? To make some sort of point? I met his gaze without flinching. Yes, Dad, I said firmly. To make a point. That I'm worth more than being pushed aside for someone who hasn't earned a damn thing. You made it clear last night that I have no place in your firm, so I'll find a firm that values what I bring to the table. Grant let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You're really making a big deal out of nothing, Kat, he said, crossing his arms. You're throwing a tantrum just because Dad isn't handing you the keys to the kingdom? His smug tone pushed me over the edge. This isn't a tantrum, Grant, I snapped. It's me taking control of my life, something you've never had to do because everything's been handed to you. My father raised a hand, silencing us both. Enough, he said sternly. Catherine, you're not leaving. You belong here with your family. I shook my head, picking up my suitcase. No, Dad. I belong somewhere I'm valued, and clearly, that's not here. I walked past them, my suitcase rolling behind me as I made my way down the grand staircase. My mother followed, her voice trembling. Catherine, please don't go, she said softly. We can figure this out as a family. I stopped at the base of the stairs and turned to look at her, the woman who had spent her life swallowing her own voice to keep the peace. Mom, I said gently, I love you, but I can't keep pretending that things will change if I stay. They won't. My father stood at the top of the stairs, watching silently, his face unreadable. Grant leaned against the banister, clearly unfazed, like my departure meant nothing. I opened the front door and turned back one last time. When you're ready to treat me like more than just a daughter who needs to marry well, you know where to find me, I said, my voice calm but firm. Then I walked out, the crisp morning air hitting my face as I closed the door behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I didn't look back after leaving that house. Within days, I secured an interview at one of the most respected law firms in Dallas. They didn't care that I was a Mercer. All they cared about were my credentials and my drive. When I walked into that office, I wasn't Henry Mercer's daughter. I was Catherine Mercer, Harvard graduate and determined attorney. By the end of the week, they offered me a position, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere for what I could do, not for who I was. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I thrived in an environment where I wasn't constantly being compared to someone else. My new boss, a sharp and modern man named Richard Hayes, took me under his wing. He valued my insight and pushed me to take on more responsibility. Within a few months, I was handling high-profile cases and earning the respect of my colleagues. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself growing up, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. As much as I was thriving professionally, the nights were harder. Cutting ties with my family wasn't easy, no matter how justified it felt. There were moments, quiet ones, like coming home to an empty apartment after a long day, when the weight of it all would hit me. I missed my mother's gentle presence, even if she never stood up for me. I even missed the chaos Grant brought to the house, as infuriating as he was. But what hurt the most was knowing my father didn't think twice about letting me go. Months passed, and I poured everything I had into my work. The cases were demanding, often leaving me in the office late into the night, but I thrived under the pressure. With each victory, my confidence grew. I wasn't just a lawyer anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. Richard Hayes, my boss, started assigning me to more high-stakes cases, and soon I was gaining a reputation as one of the firm's rising stars. The growth wasn't just professional, it was personal too. I learned to stand on my own, to make decisions without worrying about whether they would please my father or fit into the mold my family had crafted for me. Every step forward felt like proof that I was more than they had ever given me credit for. I wasn't just Henry Mercer's daughter, I was Catherine Mercer, and I was making a name for myself on my own terms. One afternoon, Richard called me into his office. It was spacious but unpretentious, a reflection of the man himself. He gestured for me to take a seat and leaned back in his chair, his piercing blue eyes studying me intently. "Catherine," he began, his tone measured, "I have a case I think you're ready for. It's high stakes, complicated, and it's going to put you in the spotlight." I nodded, intrigued. "What's the case?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. He hesitated for a moment, then continued. "We're representing a client in a major litigation against Mercer and Associates. They're suing your father's firm for negligence in a contract dispute. The stakes are enormous and the case is gaining attention." He paused, watching my reaction closely. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My stomach tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. "You want me to represent someone suing my father's firm?" I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. Richard nodded. "I know it's personal, Catherine, but that's exactly why I want you on this. You know how Mercer and Associates operates, and you're one of the sharpest lawyers we have. If anyone can win this case, it's you." I took a deep breath, trying to process what he was asking. "Richard," I said slowly, "you realize what this could mean for me, personally and professionally. This isn't just another case. It's my family." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I understand that," he said firmly. "But this is your chance to show what you're capable of, to take on the people who underestimated you and prove them wrong. Think about it, Catherine. This could be the defining case of your career." I sat back in the chair, the weight of the offer settling heavily on my shoulders. "This is a lot to take in," I said, my voice quieter now. Richard nodded, his expression understanding. "I don't expect you to decide right here and now. It's a big ask, Catherine, and I know how personal this is for you." I met his gaze, grateful for his patience. "Would it be all right if I sleep on it?" I asked, my tone more measured. "I need to think about how this could affect everything. Not just my career, but—" I trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Take all the time you need," Richard said, his voice steady. "But don't take too long. We need to move fast on this, and I want you on the team. Let me know by the end of the day tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything at stake. Taking the case meant going up against my father, the man who had dismissed me and handed everything to Grant without a second thought. It also meant going head-to-head with my family's legacy, the name that had opened so many doors for me, even as it closed others. But it also meant proving, once and for all, that I could stand on my own, even if it meant burning the last remaining bridge to my family. For 2 days, I went back and forth, weighing the risks and rewards. I thought about my father's cold dismissal of everything I'd worked for, about my mother's quiet resignation, and about Grant's smug sense of entitlement. But I also thought about the chance to show everyone, that I wasn't just Henry Mercer's daughter. By the end of the second day, I made up my mind. I walked into Richard's office the next morning, my shoulders squared and my voice steady. "I'll take the case," I said simply. His face lit up with approval. "I knew you would," he said with a grin. "Now let's get to work." The day of the first litigation proceeding arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable as I entered the courtroom. I clutched my briefcase tightly, my heels clicking against the polished floor with every step. My client walked beside me, confident in my abilities, but all I could think about was the moment I knew was coming. As I approached the front of the courtroom, I saw them, my father and Grant, sitting at the opposing table. Their faces turned toward me, and as soon as our eyes met, I felt their shock hit like a tidal wave. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as recognition dawned. Grant's mouth fell open slightly, before he quickly masked his surprise with a smug smirk, though I could see the unease in his expression. I set my briefcase on the table and met their stares head on. I wasn't going to look away or falter. I was here to do a job, and nothing, not their surprise, not their disapproval, was going to throw me off. For a brief moment, my father's gaze softened, but he quickly composed himself, leaning over to whisper something to Grant. I didn't care what he said. I was ready. As the proceedings began, I slipped into my role seamlessly. Every motion, every argument, every document I presented was executed with precision. I kept my tone calm, my demeanor collected, and my focus solely on the case. When the judge addressed me, I responded with confidence, never faltering under the weight of my father's presence or Grant's smug glances. I wasn't Catherine, the daughter or sister in that room. I was Catherine Mercer, attorney for the plaintiff, and I intended to win. Even when Grant fumbled through his arguments, clearly unprepared, I didn't let it show on my face. I treated him as I would any opposing counsel, with respect but zero leniency. Every time he misspoke or misrepresented a fact, I countered with clarity, backing up my points with solid evidence and case law. My father sat quietly for most of it, his expression unreadable, but I could feel his eyes on me. It didn't matter. I wasn't there to earn his approval anymore. I was there to do my job, and I was doing it well. After a few sessions, it became painfully obvious, at least for my father and Grant, that I was dominating the case. Every argument Grant brought to the table crumbled under the weight of my counterpoints. His inexperience was glaring, and my preparation left him scrambling for answers he didn't have. My father tried to step in once or twice, but even he couldn't salvage the damage Grant had done. The tide was turning fast, and everyone in the room knew it. By the fourth session, their side proposed a settlement. I could see the frustration etched into my father's face as their counsel approached mine with the terms. After a few back-and-forth adjustments, we agreed to a resolution that heavily favored my client. As the paperwork was signed, I caught my father glancing at me from across the room. He looked defeated, maybe even regretful. Grant, on the other hand, avoided my gaze entirely, staring at the table like a chastised schoolboy. I didn't say a word to either of them. My work here was done, and I had proven exactly what I'd set out to. Usually, when a session ended, I would stay behind to wrap up with my client and exchange pleasantries with the other lawyers. It was something I always did, a small gesture of professionalism and respect, regardless of how contentious the case might have been. But this time, there was no opportunity. My father and Grant had already gathered their things and left the room without so much as a glance in my direction. No handshake, no word of acknowledgement, not even a curt, "Well done." It stung more than I wanted to admit. Even after everything, a part of me had hoped for some kind of recognition, some small sign that they'd seen what I was capable of and respected it. Instead, they walked away, silent and defeated, leaving me standing there with the weight of unfinished business pressing on my chest. I took a deep breath, brushed it off, and refocused on my client. I had won the case. That was what mattered. That evening, back at the firm, my colleagues greeted me with applause as I walked through the doors. Richard was the first to approach, clapping me on the shoulder with a proud grin. "Well done, Catherine," he said, raising a glass of champagne. "You were flawless in there. That settlement is a big win for us, and your client couldn't have asked for a better advocate." The team had set up a small celebration in the break room, complete with drinks and hors d'oeuvres. My client even stopped by to express their gratitude, shaking my hand firmly. "You were incredible, Catherine," they said. "We couldn't have done this without you." For the first time that day, I let myself smile. Surrounded by people who valued me for my skills and hard work, I felt a sense of accomplishment that no words from my father or Grant could have given me. This was my victory, and I owned it. Later that night, alone in my apartment, the glow of the city lights filtered through the blinds as I sat by the window with a glass of wine. The adrenaline from the day had worn off, and in the quiet, my thoughts drifted back to my family. I replayed the courtroom moments in my head, the way my father's face tightened with every argument I made, the way Grant couldn't even look me in the eye when it was over, I had expected them to be angry or defensive, but the silence they left me with was harder to bear. For years, I had dreamed of earning my father's respect, of proving to him that I was worthy, not just of his name, but of a place in the firm I had once idolized. And now, even after winning a case against them, I wasn't sure what I had achieved. Did they finally see me for who I was, or was I just a reminder of their failure? The questions lingered, unanswered, as I stared out at the Dallas skyline, wondering if the ties I'd cut could ever truly be mended. The next morning, as I walked into the office, the usual buzz of conversation and ringing phones greeted me. I barely had time to settle in before Richard approached, a curious look on his face. "Catherine," he said, his tone cautious but warm. "Your father is here. He's waiting in your office." The words stopped me in my tracks. "My father?" I asked, trying to keep my expression neutral, though my stomach flipped. Richard nodded. "He came in about 20 minutes ago. Said he wanted to speak with you. Take your time. I'll hold your calls." I thanked him, though my mind was already racing as I made my way down the hall. When I opened the door to my office, there he was, Henry Mercer, sitting in the chair across from my desk, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable, though the slight furrow in his brow betrayed something. Regret, maybe? "Catherine," he said simply, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I closed the door behind me, unsure of what to expect. "Dad," I replied, keeping my tone even. "What are you doing here?" He stood up slowly, brushing his hands down his suit jacket as though trying to steady himself. "I came here to talk," he said, his tone measured but serious. "To say some things I should have said already." I walked over to my desk, setting my bag down carefully. "All right," I said, folding my arms. "I'm listening." He hesitated, glancing out the window before turning back to me. "You were brilliant in that courtroom, Catherine," he began, his voice softening. "I've seen a lot of lawyers in my time, some of the best in the business, and what you did, it was remarkable. You were prepared, professional, and relentless. You left no doubt about who the better lawyer was." His words caught me off guard, but I kept my expression steady, waiting for him to continue. "I've spent so much of my life believing that legacy meant keeping things the way they used to be," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "That a son should take over what the father built. I thought I was doing the right thing, pushing Grant to step up, even when I knew deep down he wasn't ready, or willing." He ran a hand through his silver hair, sighing deeply. "But I see now that I've been wrong. You've worked harder than anyone, Catherine. You've earned everything you have, and I failed to recognize that. I failed you." I blinked, unsure how to respond. This was the man who had spent years dismissing my ambition, telling me to settle for a life that didn't match my dreams. And now he was standing here, admitting he was wrong. "Why now?" I finally asked, my voice steady but cautious. "Why are you telling me this now, after everything that's happened?" He met my gaze, his blue eyes filled with an honesty I hadn't seen before. "Because I saw what you're capable of," he said simply. "And I realized I've been a fool. Grant isn't ready, and he may never be. But you've proven you have what it takes, not just to succeed, but to lead." He stepped closer, his tone almost pleading. "Catherine, I'm asking you to come back, to take your rightful place at Mercer and Associates. The firm needs you. I need you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long fighting for this moment, dreaming of hearing those words from him. But now that they were here, I wasn't sure if I wanted them. "What about Grant?" I asked finally. "What happens to him?" My father's face tightened, and he nodded slowly. "Grant will stay, but he'll take on a role more suited to his skills. This is about you, Catherine. It's about giving you what you've always deserved." I took a deep breath, letting his words settle for a moment. "I need time to think about this," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. "It's not something I can decide right away. A lot has happened, and I need a few days to figure out what's best for me." My father nodded, his expression serious but understanding. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need. I'm not asking for an answer today. I just needed to say my piece." He moved toward the door, but before he left, he turned back to face me. "Catherine," he said, his tone softer now. "I know I haven't said this enough, or maybe ever, but I am proud of you. Watching you in that courtroom, you were better than I ever was, better than I could have imagined." His words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment I just stared at him, unsure of how to respond. He gave me a small, almost hesitant smile before turning and walking out of the office, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I sat at my desk, his words echoed in my mind, "Better than I ever was." For so long I had fought to prove myself to him, to show that I was more than just his daughter, that I was capable, strong, and deserving of respect. And now, hearing those words, I felt a surge of pride that I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about him anymore. I was proud of myself, for standing my ground, for thriving on my own, and for showing the world, and my father, exactly what I was capable of. Now it's late at night, and I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what to do. My father's offer is everything I've worked for, everything I thought I wanted. But going back would mean stepping into a world where I was once dismissed, where I'd have to navigate the shadows of old wounds and fractured trust. It would mean working alongside Grant, knowing how little he values what we both stand to represent. And yet, staying where I am has its own challenges. This firm has been good to me, and I've grown here in ways I never imagined. But it's not my legacy. It's not Mercer and Associates, the place I dreamed of running since I was a little girl. If I go back, I'd have a chance to shape that legacy on my terms, to prove that the name belongs to me just as much as anyone else. I haven't made up my mind yet. The choice feels impossible, and the weight of it keeps me awake. But maybe you can help. What would you do in my situation? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Hey there, did you like the story? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot and makes sure you won't miss out on more great stories we share here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
First of all, why do I have to attend a funeral for someone who's not even related to our family? What does she mean by unrelated? We are not so free that we can attend strangers' funerals. Just have it without us. Saying this, my mother-in-law hung up the phone. When I returned from the funeral, I found a piece of paper on the table. A divorce paper. At that moment, I decided to sever ties with my husband and his family. I thought, I will use that money just for my mom and me. My name is Ashley, a 30-year-old office worker. My husband, Steve, and I met at a mixer 3 years ago. He had a kind demeanor, and I felt that life with him would be peaceful and happy. We exchanged contact details and started dating. As expected, he was always gentle, and I felt very healed by him. He took great care of me, and I seriously considered marrying him. Then, he felt the same way and proposed to me. Of course, I accepted immediately. That's how we got married. After that, we quickly went to greet each other's parents. First, we met my parents, who felt relieved seeing his kind demeanor. They both gave their blessing for our wedding. Next, we went to greet his family. His parents and a younger sister lived at his home, and his sister was also present during our marriage greeting. His family seemed very close, and he was even more smiley with me around. Not just kind, but family-oriented, truly a good person, I thought. Growing even fonder of him. I imagined that even if we had children, we would build a warm, happy home. However, there was one thing I disliked about marrying him: the wedding. Steve and I discussed our wedding plans extensively and were preparing various things. But at some point, his mom and sister started interfering. It started with him saying, "My mom suggests this for the wedding," which I initially appreciated. However, gradually his mom began to intrude more, even joining the wedding discussions. I wanted to decide with Steve alone, but I couldn't just tell his mom to leave, so I reluctantly allowed her to participate. Then his sister also started joining the discussions, saying this and that about the wedding. And even when I expressed my wishes, his mom and sister would say it's not good or their way is better. It was my wedding, but Steve agreed with his mom and sister, so I compromised. The worst was the wedding dress. I had a dress I desperately wanted to wear. I loved it when I tried it on before, it was adorable. But his mom and sister didn't hold back, calling it tacky. They said wearing it was unthinkable, that it made my body look bad and old. Then they picked a dress for me, insisting it was better, and forced me to wear it. I didn't feel it suited me at all. I told Steve I didn't like this dress, but he said, "Mom and sis picked it out, so let's go with it," failing to support me. I was taken aback. It was our wedding, yet why couldn't he respect my opinion? Despite that, he was very kind, and since we were already living together, he took the initiative in housework and cooking. And because I loved him, I didn't consider canceling the wedding. In the end, I wore the dress picked by his mom and sister as the main outfit, and changed into my favored dress for the reception. His mom and sister were pleased with their choice. But later I heard from everyone that the dress I chose was much more beautiful. Even my close friends wondered why the usually stylish Ashley chose such a dress. That's how my wedding became both a sweet and bitter memory. And it was an incident that made me distrust his family members. Since then, we've been very careful dealing with his family, which has kept our relations not too bad over 3 years of marriage. But recently, a problem occurred when my dad became seriously ill, requiring care. Since then, I've been visiting my parents' house to care for my dad with my mom. Steve, being fundamentally kind and able to do housework himself, didn't complain about my caring for my dad. He even drove me there when he could. However, during Christmas, I angered his family. Knowing my dad couldn't move well and to reduce my mom's burden, I returned to my parents' house early to help with the Christmas preparations, and spent it with just the 3 of us. The doctor had said my dad's condition wasn't good, and I didn't know how long I could spend time with him. So I wanted to spend Christmas with my parents and my own family. But this seemed to anger his family. Suddenly, during Christmas, Steve called. "Hello? What's up, Steve?" Ashley, can you come here right now?" "What's wrong?" "Well, Mom and everyone are upset, saying why aren't you coming?" "What?" "But I told you clearly. I want to spend this year with my parents." "Didn't you tell them properly?" "Yes, I definitely did. But Mom and everyone won't accept it. A wife usually shows her face at her husband's home during Christmas. All my relatives are waiting too, can't you come?" I was speechless. Steve understood my dad's situation better than anyone in his family. Yet, why was he persuaded by his parents? "Sorry, but I've decided to spend this year with my own parents. I can't go to your parents' place." When I spoke firmly, Steve sounded very feeble. "Don't say things like that," pleading with me to come, unable to oppose his family. But his parents are still healthy. And even his sister is still at home, and relatives are gathered. So surely it's no problem if I don't attend. Still, I wanted to spend Christmas at my home this year. But this event worsened my relationship with his family suddenly. Later, I visited his family's home with a gift for Christmas greetings and an apology. But they were noticeably cold to me. "Oh, you're coming now? What are you here for?" "Ah, I came for Christmas greetings. Here is a gift of sweets," I said, but my mother-in-law snatched it away, saying coldly, "We don't need any greetings." I realized she was quite angry and apologized. "I'm sorry I couldn't join the family gathering over Christmas. I think Steve has told you, but my dad has a severe illness. And we don't know how much longer he can be with us," I explained. "I wanted to spend Christmas with him. I hope you can understand." As I said this, the family members coldly watched me with crossed arms. "I guess you believe we're not really important to you, huh?" My mother-in-law accused me. "No. That's not true." "Oh really? Then show us some sincerity that you care about us," she challenged. Sincerity? Yes, that's right. First, buy us the sweets we like. "Not just any random sweets like these," she said, and to my shock, she threw the gift of sweets I brought into the trash can. I was stunned. Steve looked uncomfortable. Then his sister spoke up. "Well, I want a pumpkin pie from XX. That bakery was incredibly expensive." Next, my father-in-law said, "Then I'll have a cheesecake from XX. That shop was also quite pricey." Finally, my mother-in-law declared, "I think I'll have chocolates from XX. The price of those chocolates was no less than the pumpkin pie. Moreover, the 3 stores they mentioned were all located quite far from each other. Fulfilling their wishes all at once would be quite a challenge. "Can we agree on just one place?" I asked. The family members gave me the same cold look as before. And then it was Steve who responded, "Of course not, buy everyone what they want." What? I was speechless. I had thought that Steve would support me against such unreasonable demands. Moreover, on the way here, he had promised to try and mediate between his family and me. But as soon as we arrived, he sided with his family. Disappointed in Steve, I rushed to the car and hurried to buy what his family had demanded. However, upon returning, I was scolded for being late and called useless. I had to wait at popular shops, and none of the stores were close to each other, so it naturally took time. Yet, why must I be criticized like this? From then on, Steve's family regularly summoned us to their house, treating me like a servant. "You said you'd take care of us, so it's only fair that you do this much, don't you think?" they would say while making me do all sorts of chores like housework, cooking, and running errands. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and said, "I'm fed up with being treated unfairly," and refused to go to their house anymore. No matter how much I complied, their treatment of me never improved but only worsened. Moreover, balancing visits to his family with caring for my dad was too much. So I decided to only visit my parents' house. Steve blamed me, saying, "Why won't you listen to my mom?" I had reached my limit. I refused to be used like a maid or slave anymore, I told him clearly. His family might have been yelling, but I ignored them and focused on caring for my dad. However, during this time, my dad's condition worsened, and he was taken to the hospital, where he passed away. My mom and I were engulfed in grief, but there were many preparations to be made for the funeral, so we decided to mourn after everything was arranged. While busily preparing, I called Steve to inform him and asked him to have his family attend my dad's funeral. Steve said, "Okay," but minutes later I received a call from him. And it was actually my mother-in-law on the line. "Hello, is this Ashley?" "Mother, what's the matter? Who do you think you are?" "Excuse me?" Demanding us to come to a funeral all of a sudden, how presumptuous. First of all, why do I have to attend a funeral for someone who's not even related to our family? What? What did she mean by that? We are not so free that we can attend strangers' funerals. Stranger. Steve and I are married, aren't we family? Humph. A useless wife like you is just a stranger. So your dad is just a stranger to us too. We don't care about your dad's funeral. Just have it without us. With that, my mother-in-law hung up the phone. I was speechless. I hurriedly messaged Steve, but he replied, "Mom said we don't have to go, so I won't." I was shocked as I read his message over and over. Does Steve not have his own will? I was appalled by his compliance with his family's demands. I decided to focus on my dad's funeral, and together with my mom, we proceeded. When relatives asked why Steve and his family weren't there, I answered honestly. Everyone was outraged, suggesting I should cut ties with such people. At this point, I was also considering divorce. I had to have a serious talk with Steve once I got home. After returning from the funeral, I noticed a piece of paper on the table. I was shocked when I saw it. A divorce paper. Steve filled out his part already, and I was convinced his parents were fine with it. Steve was not home, and I couldn't even discuss it with him. It must have been his decision. At that moment, I decided to sever ties with my husband and his family. If they were inclined that way, I was not going to hold back either. I immediately submitted the divorce paper to the office, packed my belongings, and returned to my parents' house. Since my mom had heard the phone call during the funeral, when I told her about the divorce paper, she warmly welcomed me, saying, "This saves us a lot of trouble." I felt relieved to be able to separate from my husband at this point. If I had continued the marriage awkwardly, surely my dad's inheritance would have been targeted by his family. I decided to use that money just for my mom and me. A few days later, while I was peacefully spending time with my mom, my ex-husband suddenly called me. "Hey Ashley, how long are you planning not to come back?" "What? What are you talking about? I've already left that house." "What?" My ex-husband sounded very foolish. "What are you saying?" "Left. Because you left that divorce paper, that was your will, right?" I had reached my limit too, so I submitted it. "What? Really? That was supposed to be used as a threat by Mom and the others. I never intended to divorce you." I was utterly exasperated. You really can't make decisions on your own, can you? Breaking up was definitely the right decision. As I said this, it seemed my ex-husband was at his parents' house and had put the call on speaker, because the voice on the phone changed to my former mother-in-law. "What the hell are you doing? What do you mean? You guys are the ones who made me leave the divorce papers, right? I submitted them taking your intentions into account." "What a terrible daughter-in-law you are. I'm not your daughter-in-law anymore." "Shut up. It's absurd to submit the divorce papers before sorting out things like property division." "Right. Didn't your dad pass away and leave you an inheritance? Give us half of that money. Steve was still your husband when your dad died, so he deserves half of the inheritance." Well, indeed, the division should be half each. So, how much did you inherit? I inherited $600,000. $600,000. Upon hearing about the large sum, my ex-in-laws rejoiced. So, Steve can get $300,000. If he gets that much, you are of no use to us anymore. Once you transfer the money, live however you want. How selfish can these people be? And how foolish. What are you talking about? My dad's inheritance doesn't fall under property division. What? It's all mine. Besides, you all called my dad and me strangers, didn't you? I have no money to give to strangers. Too bad for you. Please give it up. The voices on the other end of the phone quieted down suddenly. What? So, we won't get a penny. Yes, please give it up. Isn't it fine? You got rid of a terrible daughter-in-law like me. When I said that, my ex-in-laws quickly changed their tune and began to plead with me. Ah, Ashley, everything up to now was just a lie. It was like a long, drawn-out prank. That's right. We totally think of you as family. Such blatant lies make me sick. It's a waste of time to deal with these people. I'm going to hang up now. If you even come near my house, I will call the police immediately. After I said that, my ex-in-laws fell silent. I hung up the phone and blocked their numbers. To keep things safe, my mom and I sold our house and moved to a new place. It turned out to be a really good idea. Apparently, my ex-in-laws, harboring a grudge, attempted to break into my old home with weapons to steal money from me. Luckily, strangers were living there by then and promptly reported them, leading to their arrest. As a result, my ex-husband, ex-father-in-law, and ex-sister-in-law lost their jobs and are now living a miserable life as the whole family is unemployed. Meanwhile, my mom and I signed a lease for a modest apartment, and I am using my dad's inheritance for our future. I continue to work hard and live happily with my mom, supporting each other as a family.
My cruel mother-in-law ordered me to clean the floor 2 days before my twins' birthday. I refused, and she angrily snatched my twins' milk feeder and pushed the baby cart hard against the wall, then locked the door. The twins were crying loudly when suddenly my husband arrived and immediately opened the door. Fueled by anger, I plotted my revenge, and the very next day, I unveiled a shocking surprise that would change everything. My name is Julia, and I am a 32-year-old teacher living in Chicago, Illinois. I've been meaning to share my story, not just for myself, but as a warning to others who might find themselves in a similar situation. My journey is one filled with love, betrayal, and the fight for justice, and it all began with the kind of hope that comes with falling in love. Ethan and I met through our mothers, who had been friends for years. They often reminisced about their younger days, and when they discovered we were both single, they saw it as an opportunity to play matchmaker. I remember the first time Ethan and I met at a cafe. It was a bit awkward at first, but as we talked about our shared love for action movies and pizza, the initial tension melted away. He was charming and attentive, and I felt an immediate connection. Over the following weeks, we continued to see each other, and before long, we were inseparable. We married less than a year later, and I believed we had a bright future ahead of us. But there was one cloud looming over our happiness: Ethan's mother, Martha. At first, I tried to be understanding. After all, she was his mother, and I wanted to get along. However, as the weeks turned into months, her presence began to overshadow our lives. Martha moved in with us shortly after our wedding due to some financial issues, or so she claimed. Initially, I didn't mind. I thought it would be nice to have family around, especially when we decided to start a family of our own. But soon, I realized that living with her was like living in a pressure cooker. She had this way of controlling everything, from the groceries we bought to the way I managed our home. When I became pregnant with twins, my physical health took a toll. The morning sickness was relentless, and as the months progressed, my body ached in ways I never expected. I was exhausted, struggling to balance my teaching job, the housework, and preparing for the twins' arrival. After one particularly grueling day, I suggested to Ethan that we should hire a maid to help around the house. "Martha, it's too much for me right now," I pleaded, sitting down with Ethan one evening. "I can't keep up with everything." Ethan nodded, understanding my concerns. "I think that's a great idea, Jules. I'll talk to my mom about it." But that plan was swiftly shot down when I mentioned it to Martha the next day. "Absolutely not," she snapped, crossing her arms. "There's no need for a maid. I can handle everything just fine." "But Martha, I'm pregnant with twins. It's not easy for me to keep up," I argued, trying to sound calm. She waved her hand dismissively. "You need to toughen up. It's your responsibility to manage the house, and I won't have anyone else in my home." The conversation left me feeling helpless and defeated. I had hoped for support, but instead, I felt like a servant in my own home. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself increasingly frustrated with Martha's demands. She expected me to cook, clean, and prepare for the twins while she did little more than sit on the couch and criticize my efforts. As my due date approached, the stress mounted. One afternoon, as I lay on the couch, I felt sudden, sharp pains. Panic gripped me. Ethan was at work, and I needed to get to the hospital, but Martha was there, sprawled out in the living room, oblivious to my distress. "Martha," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "I think I'm going into labor. I need to go to the hospital." She glanced up briefly before turning back to the TV. "That's your problem, Julia. Handle it yourself." I was stunned by her coldness. Desperation surged through me, and I grabbed my phone, calling Ethan. "Please, I need you. I think the babies are coming." His voice was laced with concern. "I'm on my way, Julia. Just hold on." The wait felt like an eternity, but Ethan finally arrived, and together we rushed to the hospital. The delivery was intense, and after what felt like hours, I finally heard the cries of my twins, a boy and a girl. Ethan's face lit up with joy as he held them for the first time, but my heart was heavy. The reality of our living situation loomed over me. When we returned home the next day, I was exhausted but eager to begin this new chapter with our children. However, my relief was short-lived. Martha wasted no time in demanding that I take care of the household chores. "Julia, you need to clean this place up," she ordered, her arms crossed as she stood in the kitchen. "The house looks like a disaster." I stared at her, incredulous. "Martha, I just had twins. I need time to rest and bond with them." She huffed. "You're not the only one living here. I expect you to pull your weight." That day, I felt my frustration boiling over. It wasn't just about the chores. It was about the way Martha treated me, like I was nothing more than a maid in my own home. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but as I looked at my babies, I realized I needed to stand my ground. It was in that moment of anger and sadness that I resolved to do something about Martha's behavior. I couldn't let her control our lives anymore, not when it affected my children. I just didn't know how I would confront her. But deep down, I knew I had to protect my family at all costs. The struggle was just beginning, and I had to prepare myself for what lay ahead. After bringing the twins home, I thought things would settle down, but Martha's control only tightened. Each day felt like a battle between her demands and my need to care for my newborns. Ethan was supportive, but he was often at work, and I found myself alone, navigating the chaos. One afternoon, as I fed the twins, Martha burst into the living room, hands on her hips. "Julia, the house is a mess. You really need to start taking this seriously. It looks like a tornado hit it." I looked around, overwhelmed. Toys were scattered, and a few dirty dishes sat in the sink.
"But I was doing my best."
"Martha, I just gave birth to 2 babies. I'm doing the best I can here." "Your best isn't good enough," she shot back, her voice cold. "You can't expect me to live in filth. Get it together." Frustration bubbled inside me, and I fought back tears. It felt like I was drowning, suffocated by her demands and expectations. I wanted to scream, to tell her that I was a mother now, not just her daughter-in-law. But every time I opened my mouth, her piercing gaze silenced me. As the days passed, I noticed more troubling signs of Martha's disregard for the twins. One day, I was in the kitchen preparing a bottle for my daughter when I heard her cries from the nursery. I rushed in to find Martha standing by the crib, looking exasperated. "Can you not control them? They've been crying for ages," she snapped. "Martha, they're newborns. They cry. It's what they do," I replied, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "Not for this long," she retorted, pushing the stroller harshly as if to quiet them. My heart sank. The way she handled my children made my skin crawl. Determined to document her behavior, I decided to install hidden cameras in the nursery. I needed proof of what I suspected. Martha's treatment of my twins was neglectful at best. It was a risky move, but I felt I had no choice. I couldn't let her harm my children without consequences. With the cameras set up, I watched over the next few days, horrified by what I saw. Martha would often ignore the twins' cries, leaving them to wail, while she focused on her own needs. I recorded instances where she would harshly shove the stroller or refuse to feed them when they were hungry. Each video I reviewed filled me with anger and fear for my children's safety. One evening, after another long day of her neglect, I sat down with Ethan to discuss everything. "Ethan, I can't keep living like this. I'm worried about the twins. I've installed cameras because I need to show you what she's doing." He looked taken aback. "Cameras? Why would you do that?" "Because I need evidence. She's treating them poorly, Ethan. You have to see this." I felt a surge of desperation, my heart pounding as I spoke. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded. "Okay, let's watch it together." As we sat on the couch, I loaded the footage. I watched Ethan's expression change from confusion to disbelief as he witnessed Martha's behavior. He was silent, his eyes glued to the screen, anger simmering just below the surface. After the last video ended, he turned to me, his face dark. "I can't believe she would do this. We have to confront her." My heart raced at the thought.
I know.
"But we have to be careful. She can be unpredictable." "I won't let her hurt you or the twins anymore," he said firmly. "It's time we set boundaries." The next day, we confronted Martha together. Ethan's face was set with determination as we walked into the living room where she sat, reading a magazine. "Martha," he began, his voice steady, "we need to talk about your behavior toward Julia and the twins." Her eyes narrowed. "What's this about?" "I don't have time for your accusations." "It's not an accusation. It's the truth," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We have evidence of how you've treated the twins, and it's unacceptable." Her face went pale as Ethan showed her the recordings. She looked between us, the facade of control beginning to crumble. "Those are just moments taken out of context," she stammered, but the anger in her voice couldn't mask her fear. "Mom, this isn't okay. You're endangering our children," Ethan said, his voice rising. "If you can't respect our family, you can't stay here." Martha's eyes flashed with indignation. "You think you can just throw me out? I'm your mother. I raised you. And I won't let you harm my wife or our children." Ethan shouted back, his voice shaking with emotion. The confrontation had reached a boiling point, and I felt a mix of fear and empowerment. For the first time, I saw Ethan stand up to his mother, and it filled me with hope. But I also knew this was just the beginning of a long fight. As Martha stormed off, her face flushed with rage, I felt a sense of dread settle in. This wouldn't be the end of it. We were now in a battle for our family's safety, and I had to be ready for whatever she might do next. The stakes were high, and I had to protect my children at all costs. The confrontation with Martha left an uncomfortable tension hanging in the air. Ethan and I both felt the aftermath like a storm brewing on the horizon, but we had crossed a threshold that couldn't be undone. He had stood up to her for the first time, but I could tell Martha wouldn't take this lightly. As I sat nursing the twins that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to escalate. The following days were tense. Martha retreated into herself, barely speaking to either of us. She moved through the house like a ghost, her silence deafening. I half expected her to lash out, but instead, she seemed to simmer with resentment. It was unnerving, and I found myself on edge, constantly checking the nursery cameras for any signs of her neglect. One afternoon, I was sitting on the couch with the twins when I heard the front door slam shut. I looked up to see Ethan entering, his face flushed. "I just got off the phone with my mom," he said, his voice tight. "What did she want?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "She's claiming that we're trying to keep her from her grandchildren," he replied, his jaw clenching. "She says she's going to tell everyone that we're unfit parents." My heart raced. Is she serious? She has no right to say that. We have proof of her neglect. "I know," Ethan said, running a hand through his hair. "But I'm worried she'll go to extreme lengths to prove her point. We need to be careful." I nodded, feeling the weight of our situation pressing down on me. I had hoped that confronting her would lead to some kind of resolution, but it seemed to have only fueled her anger. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of what Martha might do next. I had heard stories about how toxic family members could turn others against their own, and I didn't want that for my children. They deserve to grow up in a loving environment, free from fear and manipulation. As the sun rose the next morning, I decided to take proactive steps to protect my family. I began documenting everything: Martha's behavior, her comments, and the instances of neglect captured on the cameras. I created a detailed log, noting dates and times, alongside the video evidence. I knew that if it came to a legal battle, I needed to be prepared. Later that day, while the twins napped, I contacted a family lawyer I had found online. My heart pounded as I explained the situation, feeling both empowered and terrified. "I need to know my options," I said, my voice shaky. "I can't let her hurt my children." The lawyer listened attentively. "It sounds like you have valid concerns about your mother-in-law's behavior. With the evidence you've gathered, you could potentially file for a restraining order or take further legal action if necessary." I felt a mix of relief and dread wash over me. "What if she retaliates?" I asked. "We can help you with that," the lawyer assured me. "You have rights as a parent, and it's important to protect your children." After our call, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I wasn't going to let Martha control our lives any longer. That evening, Ethan and I sat down again to discuss the lawyer's advice. "Julia, you've done everything right," he said, wrapping his arm around me as I held the twins. "If this is what it takes to keep our family safe, we have to move forward." I nodded, grateful for his support. "I just want to make sure they're safe. I can't bear the thought of her trying to take them away from us." The next week, we filed for a restraining order against Martha, detailing her neglect and the emotional abuse we had endured. The process was nerve-wracking, but I felt a sense of relief with each step we took. I was reclaiming control of my life and my family. However, just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, I received a call from the lawyer. "Julia, we need to prepare for a hearing. Your mother-in-law is contesting the restraining order," he said, his voice serious. "What does that mean?" I felt the world tilt on its axis. "It means Martha will likely try to defend herself in court, and we need to be ready to present your evidence convincingly. This won't be easy, but you have a strong case," he reassured me. Ethan and I exchanged worried glances. The reality of facing Martha in court felt daunting, but I was determined to protect my children. As the day of the hearing approached, I spent every moment preparing, gathering evidence, and mentally preparing for the battle ahead. The stakes were high, and I knew that this was more than just a legal issue. It was about standing up against toxic familial control and protecting the ones I loved. As I held my twins close, I vowed to fight for their future, no matter the cost. The fight was far from over, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The day of the hearing arrived, and I felt a mix of dread and determination as Ethan and I walked into the courthouse. The air was thick with tension, and my heart raced in my chest. I had prepared myself as best as I could, but facing Martha in a courtroom felt like stepping into the lion's den. We took our seats, and I could feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. Ethan held my hand tightly, his warmth grounding me as I focused on the task ahead. The room buzzed with chatter as we waited for the proceedings to begin, and I glanced around, spotting Martha across the room. She looked different, more put together than I'd ever seen her, her face a mask of determination. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. I felt my heart pound as we stood up to present our case. I had never been in a courtroom before, and the formalities made me feel small. But I was determined not to back down. The lawyer guided us through the process, and I tried to steady my breathing. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my hands shaking slightly. Your Honor, I'm here today because I need to protect my children from their grandmother's neglect and emotional abuse. I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. I spoke about Martha's behavior, detailing the incidents I had documented. I explained how her actions affected not only me but also the twins, emphasizing their safety and well-being. After I finished, my lawyer presented the video evidence. I watched the footage of Martha ignoring the twins' cries and treating them with indifference. Each clip was a painful reminder of what we had endured, but it was also a testament to my resolve. I could see the judge's expression shift as he absorbed the evidence. Then it was Martha's turn. She rose and attempted to paint herself as the victim, claiming I was exaggerating and that I was an unfit mother. Her words dripped with venom, and I felt the anger boiling inside me. Your Honor, I interjected, finding my voice. I'm not trying to keep my children from their grandmother. I just want to ensure they're safe and cared for. This is about protecting them. The judge looked at Martha with a stern expression. This behavior is unacceptable. Children's welfare is my primary concern. After what felt like hours, the judge finally delivered his verdict. Based on the evidence presented, I find that there is sufficient cause for concern regarding the well-being of the children. I am issuing a restraining order against Martha, prohibiting her from coming within a certain distance of the family. Relief flooded through me as I processed his words. The weight I had been carrying lifted slightly, but I knew this was just one battle won in an ongoing war. Martha's face twisted in rage as she realized the outcome, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory, knowing that I had stood up for my family. As we left the courthouse, Ethan wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close. We did it, Jules, he whispered, his voice filled with pride. You were amazing in there. I smiled, tears of relief spilling down my cheeks. I couldn't have done it without you, Ethan. Thank you for standing by me. In the weeks that followed, we focused on rebuilding our family life, free from Martha's toxic influence. I learned to set boundaries, to put my children first, and to trust my instincts as a mother. The twins thrived in the peaceful environment we created, and I found joy in the little moments. Each coo, each giggle, and each milestone felt like a victory. Though Martha tried to reach out, I maintained my boundaries. I realized that protecting my children meant sometimes making tough choices, including cutting ties with family members who wouldn't respect our family unit. As I held my twins close, I reflected on the journey we had taken. It was a hard-fought battle, but I had learned the importance of standing up against toxic behavior, not just for myself, but for my children. This experience had strengthened my bond with Ethan, and together we created a loving home where our children could thrive. Our story didn't end with the court's decision. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future. I would always fight for my family, and no one would ever take that away from us again.
The shattered remains of my favorite mug lay scattered across the kitchen floor, a fitting metaphor for my life at that moment. I stood there, frozen, staring at the mess as my mind raced to process the information I'd just uncovered. Clara? What was that noise? Nate's voice called from the living room, snapping me out of my trance. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. Nothing, I managed to croak out. Just dropped a mug. Footsteps approached, and Nate appeared in the doorway. His brow furrowed with concern as he took in the scene. Are you okay? You look pale. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. Instead, I focused on the shards of ceramic at my feet. I'm fine, I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. Nate stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm. I flinched away instinctively, and confusion flashed across his face. Clara, what's wrong? The dam inside me broke. "How long?" I demanded, finally meeting his gaze. "How long what?" he asked, but I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. I thrust my phone at him, the incriminating email still displayed on the screen. "How long have you been sleeping with her?" Nate's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, fumbling for words. Clara, I can explain." "Explain?" I laughed bitterly. "Explain how you've been cheating on me with some woman named Melissa, how you've been lying to me for God knows how long." "It's not what you think," Nate pleaded, reaching for me again. I stepped back, my heel crunching on a piece of broken mug. "Don't touch me," I hissed. "Just don't." The front door opened, and I heard Ava's cheerful voice. "Mom! Dad! I'm home!" Panic seized me. I couldn't let our daughter see us like this. "We'll discuss this later," I whispered fiercely to Nate. "Act normal." Nate nodded, his face a mask of guilt and fear. We both plastered on fake smiles as Ava bounded into the kitchen. "Hi, sweetie," I said, my voice unnaturally high. "How was school?" Ava's eyes widened as she noticed the broken mug. "What happened?" "Oh, just a little accident," I said, forcing a laugh. "Nothing to worry about. Why don't you go start your homework? I'll be there to help in a minute." As soon as Ava was out of earshot, I turned back to Nate. "We're not done," I warned him. "Not by a long shot." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I helped Ava with her homework, made dinner, and tucked her into bed, all while my insides churned with rage and betrayal. Finally, with Ava asleep, I confronted Nate in our bedroom. "Start talking," I demanded. Nate sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It was a mistake, Clara, a stupid, terrible mistake." "How long?" I repeated my earlier question. He hesitated. 6 months. The words hit me like a physical blow. 6 months. Half a year of lies and deceit. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I don't know," Nate said, his eyes pleading. "Things between us have been different lately. I felt disconnected, and Melissa was just there." I laughed humorlessly. "Oh, so it's my fault because I've been busy with work and taking care of our daughter?" "No, that's not what I meant," Nate backpedaled. "I'm not blaming you. It was all me. I made a terrible choice, and I'm so sorry." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "Sorry isn't good enough, Nate. You've broken us. How am I supposed to trust you ever again?" As I stood there, staring at the man I thought I knew, I realized our life together would never be the same. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I stared at Nate across the kitchen table, my fingers wrapped tightly around my coffee mug. The silence between us was thick with unspoken words and lingering resentment. "I've been thinking," Nate said, breaking the tension. "Maybe we need a change of scenery." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I think we should move in with my parents for a while." The suggestion hit me like a bucket of ice water. "Your parents? Nate, are you serious?" "Just hear me out," he pleaded. "It could be good for us. A fresh start, away from everything." I laughed bitterly. "You mean away from your mistakes?" Nate flinched but pressed on. "Mom and Dad have that big house. We'd have our own space and they could help with Ava. It would give us time to focus on us, on rebuilding our marriage." The word marriage made my stomach churn. Was there even anything left to rebuild? "Clara," Nate said softly, reaching for my hand. This time I didn't pull away. "I know I messed up, but I want to make this work. For us, for Ava, please just consider it." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of our vows pressing down on me. "For better or for worse, right?" "Fine," I said finally. "I'll think about it." The next few days were a whirlwind of discussions and preparations. Despite my reservations, I found myself agreeing to Nate's plan. Maybe a change would do us good. Maybe his parents' presence would keep him on the straight and narrow. The day of the move arrived all too quickly. As we pulled up to Evelyn and Alfred's sprawling suburban home, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. Evelyn burst out of the front door, arms wide open. "Oh, my darlings," she cried, enveloping Nate in a hug before turning to Ava. "And there's my precious granddaughter." I hung back, watching the scene unfold. Alfred appeared in the doorway, nodding a greeting. "Clara," he said, his tone cordial but cool. "Alfred," I replied, forcing a smile. As we settled into our new living arrangement, I tried to remain optimistic. Evelyn and Alfred were polite, if a bit distant. Nate seemed more relaxed, more attentive. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. But as the days turned into weeks, cracks began to appear in the facade. It started small. Evelyn forgetting to include me in meal planning, Alfred making offhand comments about my work hours, the way they'd fall silent when I entered a room, exchanging meaningful glances. One evening, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "I just don't understand what he sees in her." Evelyn's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Nate could do so much better." Now, Alfred replied. "She's the mother of our grandchild. We have to tolerate her for Ava's sake." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding. Tolerate me? Is that what they thought? "Clara?" Nate's voice startled me. "What are you doing?" I turned to face him, anger and hurt warring inside me. "Your parents," I hissed. "They hate me." Nate's brow furrowed. "What? No, they don't. You're imagining things." "Imagining things?" I repeated incredulously. "I just heard them talking about me. They said they have to tolerate me." "I'm sure you misunderstood," Nate said, his tone placating. "Mom and Dad love you." I stared at him, disbelief turning to fury. "Are you seriously taking their side?" "I'm not taking sides," Nate protested. "I just think you're overreacting." The word overreacting was the final straw. "You know what?" I snapped. "I'm done. This was a mistake. All of it." I stormed past him, heading for our room. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, I could hear Nate following me, pleading. "Clara, please, don't do this. We can work it out." I whirled to face him, tears stinging my eyes. "Work what out, Nate? Your affair, your parents' disdain, your inability to stand up for me? Tell me, what exactly are we working out?" As I stood there, suitcase in hand, I realized I was at a crossroads. Stay and fight for a marriage that felt more like a prison, or leave and face an uncertain future. The choice I made would change everything. I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of hushed voices downstairs. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then reality crashed back in. I was in Nate's childhood bedroom, surrounded by his old trophies and faded posters, trying to salvage a marriage that felt like it was held together by fraying threads. Sighing, I dragged myself out of bed and made my way downstairs. The voices grew clearer as I approached the kitchen. "Just don't think she's trying hard enough," Evelyn was saying. "Nate deserves better." I froze, my hand on the doorknob. Nate's response was too low for me to hear, but Evelyn's dismissive snort came through loud and clear. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The conversation stopped abruptly, 3 pairs of eyes turning to me. "Good morning," I said, forcing a smile. "Clara, dear," Evelyn chirped, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We were just talking about you." "I heard," I replied coolly, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Nate cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mom was just saying how she thinks we should all go out for dinner tonight, as a family." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what brought this on?" Alfred spoke up, his tone gruff. "We thought it might be good for you all to get out of the house. You've been cooped up here for weeks." I bit back a retort about whose idea it was for us to move in the first place. Instead, I nodded. "Sure, dinner sounds nice." The rest of the day passed in a blur of tension and forced politeness. By the time we arrived at the restaurant, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. As we settled into our seats, Evelyn leaned across the table. "Clara, dear, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering for you. I know how indecisive you can be." I blinked, taken aback. "Actually, Evelyn, Oh, it's no trouble at all," she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm sure you'll love it." I looked to Nate for support, but he was engrossed in the wine list. Ava, sensing the tension, squirmed uncomfortably in her seat. The meal progressed, each moment more excruciating than the last. Evelyn dominated the conversation, barely allowing me to get a word in edgewise. Alfred made thinly veiled comments about my parenting skills, while Nate sat in silence, avoiding eye contact. Finally, as dessert arrived, I'd had enough. "Excuse me," I said, standing abruptly. "I need some air." I rushed out of the restaurant, gulping in the cool night air. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Clara?" Nate's voice came from behind me. "Are you okay?" I whirled to face him. "Am I okay? Are you seriously asking me that?" He looked bewildered. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" I repeated incredulously. "Your parents have been insulting me all night, and you've just sat there and let it happen." Nate's face hardened. "They're trying their best, Clara. You're not exactly making it easy." I stared at him, disbelief turning to anger. "So this is my fault now?" I didn't say that, he backpedaled, but you could try harder to get along with them. Try harder? I hissed. I've been trying so hard I'm about to break, Nate, and you don't even see it. His expression softened. Clara, please, let's not do this here. But I was beyond caring about making a scene. No, Nate, we're doing this now. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's so clearly not. What are you saying? He asked, a note of fear creeping into his voice. I took a deep breath, the words I'd been holding back for weeks finally spilling out. I'm saying that this isn't working. Moving in with your parents, trying to fix our marriage, it's all been a huge mistake. Nate's face crumpled. You don't mean that. I do, I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. I think it's time we face the truth. Our marriage is over, Nate. As the words hung in the air between us, I realized there was no going back. The life I'd known, the future I'd planned, was crumbling around me. But amid the fear and uncertainty, I felt something else stirring, a spark of hope, a glimmer of freedom. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't live like this anymore. The days following our disastrous dinner outing blurred together in a haze of tension and unspoken words. Nate and I barely spoke, tiptoeing around each other like strangers. Evelyn and Alfred's hostility, once veiled, now simmered just beneath the surface. One morning I woke to find Ava's bed empty. Panic gripped me as I rushed downstairs, only to find her giggling in the kitchen with Evelyn. There you are, sleepyhead. Evelyn cooed, her saccharine tones setting my teeth on edge. I was just teaching Ava how to make proper pancakes. Lord knows she needs someone to show her these things. I bit back a retort, forcing a smile for Ava's sake. That's nice, sweetie. Why don't you go get dressed for school? As Ava scampered off, Evelyn's demeanor changed instantly. You know, Clara, she said, her voice dripping with disdain, it wouldn't kill you to take more interest in domestic matters. A woman should know how to keep a proper home. I felt my temper flare. I manage just fine, Evelyn. My career doesn't make me any less of a mother or wife. She scoffed. Does it? Because from where I'm standing, your family is falling apart. Her words hit like a physical blow. Before I could respond, Nate walked in. Everything okay? He asked, glancing between us. Just fine, dear, Evelyn chirped, all sweetness again. Clara and I were just having a little chat about family values. Nate nodded, avoiding my gaze. Right. Well, I'm heading to work. Clara, don't forget we have that dinner with my boss tonight. I froze. That's tonight? Nate, I can't. I have a deadline. You can't cancel, he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. This is important for my career. As he left, Evelyn's smug smile made my blood boil. See? A good wife would remember these things. That evening, I found myself at an upscale restaurant, seated across from Nate's boss and his wife. The conversation flowed around me as I struggled to focus, my mind still on my unfinished article. So, Clara, Nate's boss turned to me. Nate tells me you're a journalist, too. How's that going with family life? Before I could answer, Nate jumped in. Oh, Clara's thinking of scaling back her work, aren't you, honey? To focus more on home life. I stared at him, dumbfounded. What? Nate's boss nodded approvingly. Good for you. Family should always come first. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. As soon as we got home, I rounded on Nate. What the hell was that about? Scaling back my work? He sighed, loosening his tie. Come on, Clara. You know how important this promotion is. I was just saying what he wanted to hear. At my expense? I hissed, mindful of Ava sleeping upstairs. Don't be so dramatic, he scoffed. It's not like your job is as demanding as mine anyway. I reeled back as if slapped. Is that what you really think? Before he could answer, Alfred appeared in the doorway. Everything all right? We could hear you from upstairs. Nate plastered on a smile. Just a little disagreement, Dad. Nothing to worry about. Alfred's gaze settled on me, cold and judgmental. Clara, I think it's time you started considering what's best for this family. Your selfish behavior is tearing it apart. Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and resentment came pouring out. Selfish? I've given everything to this family. I've put up with your constant criticism, your son's infidelity, all while trying to maintain my career and raise my daughter. And I'm the selfish one? The room fell silent. Nate and Alfred stared at me, shocked. In that moment, I realized I'd reached a crossroads. I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I couldn't keep sacrificing my self-respect, my career, my happiness for a family that didn't value me. I'm done, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I can't do this anymore. As I turned to leave the room, I caught sight of Ava standing on the stairs, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. My heart broke, but I knew in that moment that I had to be strong, for both of us. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. Things couldn't go on as they were. It was time for a change, no matter how terrifying that prospect might be. The morning after my outburst, I woke with a sense of dread weighing heavily on my chest. The house was eerily quiet as I made my way downstairs, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. I found Nate in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair disheveled. "We need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. I nodded, pouring myself a cup. "Yes, we do." "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Nate began. "I know things haven't been easy." "Easy?" I interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping me. "Nate, things haven't been easy since the day I found out about your affair. Living here, with your parents constantly undermining me, has been a nightmare." Nate's face hardened. "They're just trying to help, Clara. Maybe if you made more of an effort." "Don't you dare put this on me," I hissed, my anger flaring. I've been trying so hard I'm exhausted, but it's never enough, is it? Not for you, not for them." Before Nate could respond, Evelyn swept into the kitchen. "Oh, good, you're both up. Nate, dear, don't forget you promised to take your father golfing today." I stared at Nate incredulously. "Golfing? Now?" He at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I forgot. Dad's been looking forward to it." "Of course he has," I muttered, shaking my head in disbelief. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Is there a problem, Clara? Surely you can handle things here for one day without my son." Something inside me snapped. "You know what, Evelyn? There is a problem. The problem is that your son and I are trying to have an important conversation about our marriage, and you're more concerned about a golf game." Evelyn's face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home? Nate, are you going to let her talk to me this way?" I turned to Nate, waiting to see what he would do. His eyes darted between us, panic evident on his face. "Mom, Clara, please, can't we all just calm down?" His weak attempt at peacemaking was the final straw. "No, Nate, we can't just calm down. This is our life, our marriage falling apart, and you're worried about keeping the peace?" I stormed out of the kitchen, my mind racing. As I reached the stairs, I heard Ava's small voice. "Mommy? Why is everyone yelling?" My heart clenched. I knelt down, pulling her into a hug. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Mommy and Daddy are just having a disagreement." "Are we going to have to leave?" she asked, her voice trembling. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I pulled back, looking into her worried eyes. In that moment, I knew I had to make a decision, not just for myself, but for Ava. "I don't know, honey," I said honestly. "But I promise, whatever happens, we'll be okay." As I held my daughter, I heard Nate and Evelyn's voices rising again downstairs. The constant tension, the arguments, the silent treatment, it was all taking a toll on Ava. I couldn't let this continue. With a deep breath, I made my decision. I gently pulled away from Ava. "Sweetie, can you go to your room and pack a small bag? Just some clothes and your favorite toys." Her eyes widened. "Are we going on a trip?" I forced a smile. "Something like that. Go on now, I'll be right there." As Ava scampered off, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I should have called weeks ago. "Joan? It's Clara. I need your help. Can Ava and I stay with you for a while?" My sister's voice was warm and concerned. "Of course. What's going on?" I took a shaky breath. "I'm leaving Nate. I can't do this anymore." As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief wash over me. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. Joan's apartment felt like a sanctuary after the suffocating atmosphere at Nate's parents' house. As I sank into her plush couch, the weight of the past few months seemed to lift slightly from my shoulders. "Okay, sis," Joan said, handing me a steaming mug of tea. "Start from the beginning." I poured out everything. Nate's affair, the move to his parents' house, the constant belittling and criticism. Joan listened intently, her lawyer's mind no doubt cataloging every detail. "Clara," she said when I finished, her voice gentle but firm, "this is emotional abuse. What they've been doing to you, it's not okay." Her words hit me like a thunderbolt. Abuse. I'd been so caught up in trying to make things work, I hadn't even realized. We need to document everything, Joan continued, switching into lawyer mode. Every insult, every manipulative comment, it'll be crucial if Nate tries to fight for custody of Ava. The mention of custody sent a chill down my spine. You really think he'd do that? Joan's expression hardened. After what you've told me about his parents, we need to be prepared for anything. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into gathering evidence. I wrote down every memory of Evelyn and Alfred's mistreatment, every instance of Nate's neglect. Joan helped me organize it all, building a case that left me stunned when I saw it laid out. But even as I worked, a nagging doubt gnawed at me. Was I really ready to end my marriage, to tear apart Ava's family? My phone buzzed with a text from Nate. We need to talk. Come to the house tomorrow. I showed Joan the message, my stomach churning. I have to go, don't I? She nodded grimly. Yes, but not alone. I'm coming with you. The next day, we pulled up to Nate's parents' house. My palms were sweaty as I rang the doorbell. Nate answered, his eyes widening at the sight of Joan. What's she doing here? He demanded. Moral support, I said firmly, pushing past him into the house. Evelyn and Alfred were waiting in the living room, their faces masks of disapproval. Well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter-in-law, Evelyn sneered. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I'm here to talk about divorce proceedings, Nate, and custody arrangements for Ava. The room erupted into chaos. Nate started pleading, Evelyn shrieked about the sanctity of marriage, and Alfred thundered about ungrateful wives. Through it all, Joan stood beside me, a pillar of strength. Enough, I shouted, silencing the room. I've made my decision. I won't live like this anymore, and I won't let Ava grow up in this toxic environment. Nate's face contorted with anger. You can't take my daughter away from me. Watch me, I retorted, my voice ice cold. I have documented evidence of the emotional abuse I've endured in this house. Do you really want to take this to court? The color drained from Nate's face. Evelyn, however, wasn't backing down. You ungrateful little. She lunged forward, her hand raised as if to slap me. Joan stepped between us, her voice sharp as a knife. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mrs. Thompson. Assault charges wouldn't look good in a custody battle. Evelyn recoiled, sputtering with rage. I turned to Nate, my heart pounding. This is your last chance, Nate. Are you going to stand with your wife and daughter, or with them? The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. I could see the conflict in Nate's eyes, the war between the man I'd married and the son his parents had molded. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't leave my parents, Clara. They need me. In that moment I felt something inside me shatter. The last lingering hope that we could salvage our marriage crumbled to dust, but along with the pain came a surge of determination. Then we're done, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Expect to hear from my lawyer. As Joan and I walked out of the house, I felt like I was leaving more than just a failed marriage behind. I was leaving behind years of self-doubt, of compromise, of settling for less than I deserved. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. And more importantly, I had the strength to show Ava what it meant to stand up for oneself, to demand respect and love. As we drove away, I allowed myself a small smile. This wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning. The day of the final confrontation arrived with a sense of foreboding. Joan and I had spent weeks preparing, but as we approached Nate's lawyer's office, my stomach churned with anxiety. Remember, Joan whispered as we entered the building, you hold all the cards, stay strong. Nate was already there, looking haggard and defeated. His eyes met mine briefly before darting away. His lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, eyed us coolly. Let's get started, shall we? She said, gesturing to the conference room. As we settled into our seats, I couldn't help but think of Ava, waiting at Joan's apartment with a babysitter. Everything I was about to do was for her. Nate's lawyer spoke first. My client is willing to agree to joint custody with Ava primarily residing with him and his parents. I felt a surge of anger. Absolutely not, I snapped. I have evidence of the emotional abuse I suffered in that house. Ava will not be subjected to that environment. The lawyer's eyes narrowed. Allegations of abuse are serious, Mrs. Thompson. Do you have proof? Joan slid a thick folder across the table. We have documented every instance of mistreatment, corroborated by witnesses and psychological evaluations. As Nate and his lawyer pored over the documents, I saw the color drain from his face. "Clara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I had no idea it was this bad." I laughed bitterly. "Of course you didn't. You were too busy trying to please your parents to notice what they were doing to your wife and daughter." Nate's lawyer cleared her throat. "In light of this evidence, we're prepared to discuss a more equitable arrangement." The next few hours were a blur of negotiations. Custody arrangements, division of assets, alimony. Every detail of our lives together was dissected and divided. Through it all, I held firm, buoyed by Joan's steady presence and the memory of everything I'd endured. Finally, we reached an agreement. Primary custody of Ava would be mine, with Nate granted visitation rights. Our assets would be split fairly, and I would retain our family home. As Nate picked up the pen to sign the divorce papers, he hesitated. "Clara," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry for everything. I should have protected you and Ava." For a moment I felt a flicker of the love we once shared, but then I remembered the years of neglect, of choosing his parents over his family, and my resolve hardened. "It's too late for sorry, Nate," I said quietly. "Just sign the papers." With a shaky hand, Nate signed. As I added my own signature, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was done. I was free. As we left the office, Joan squeezed my hand. "You did it, sis. I'm so proud of you." But our victory was short-lived. As we stepped out of the building, we were confronted by a furious Evelyn and Alfred. "You conniving witch!" Evelyn shrieked. "How dare you turn our son against us?" Alfred loomed over me, his face red with rage. "You'll regret this, Clara. We'll make sure you never see Ava again." I felt a moment of panic, but then something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up anger and frustration came pouring out. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice ringing through the street. "You will not threaten me or my daughter ever again. Your reign of manipulation and abuse ends now." I turned to Nate, who had followed us out. "This is your last chance, Nate. Your parents or your daughter. Choose." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. I could see the conflict in Nate's eyes, the war between the man I'd married and the son his parents had molded. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I choose Ava." Evelyn let out a wail of despair, while Alfred's face contorted with fury, but I barely noticed them. In that moment, looking at Nate's defeated form, I realized something profound. I didn't need his choice. I didn't need his approval or his parents' acceptance. I had everything I needed, my daughter, my freedom, and my self-respect. As Joan and I walked away, leaving the chaos behind, I felt a surge of triumph. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, I was ready to face it head-on. The old Clara, the one who had bent and compromised and suffered in silence, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who would fight for herself and her daughter with every breath. This wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning, full of possibility and hope, and I was ready for it. 5 years had passed since that fateful day when I walked away from Nate and his toxic family. Life hadn't been easy, but it had been mine, filled with hard-won victories, cherished moments with Ava, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. I was in the middle of preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. Ava, now a spirited 13-year-old, called out, "I'll get it, Mom." A moment later, I heard her startled voice. "Dad?" My blood ran cold. I rushed to the door, wiping my hands on my apron. There stood Nate, a shadow of his former self. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and he reeked of alcohol. "Clara," he slurred, swaying slightly, "I need your help." I instinctively stepped in front of Ava, shielding her. "Nate, what are you doing here?" He stumbled forward, and I held up a hand to stop him. "Please," he begged. "I've lost everything. My job, my savings. Even Mom and Dad have cut me off. I didn't know where else to go." A part of me, the part that had once loved this man, ached to help him. But I remembered the years of neglect, the pain he'd put me through, and I steeled myself. "Ava, honey," I said calmly, "go to your room, please." Once Ava was out of earshot, I turned back to Nate. "You can't be here," I said firmly. "You're drunk and you're scaring our daughter." "Our daughter," he repeated bitterly, "the one you took from me." Anger flared within me. "I didn't take her from you, Nate. You chose to let her go when you refused to stand up to your parents." He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my arm. "You ruined my life," he shouted. For a moment, fear gripped me, but then something shifted. I was no longer the woman who would cower or make excuses for him. I was stronger now. With a swift motion, I broke free of his grip and pushed him back. "No, Nate," I said, my voice steady and strong. "You ruined your own life, and I won't let you ruin mine or Ava's any longer." I saw a flicker of the old Nate in his eyes, shame, regret, and a hint of admiration. But it was too late for that now. "I'm calling you a cab," I said. "And then I'm calling my lawyer. This ends now, Nate. No more surprise visits, no more manipulations. If you want to see Ava, you'll do it through proper channels, and you'll do it sober." As I dialed the cab company, I felt a presence behind me. Ava stood there, her eyes wide but determined. "Is Dad okay?" she asked softly. I knelt down to her level, my heart swelling with love and pride for this brave, compassionate girl. "He's going through a tough time, sweetie, but that's not our responsibility anymore. We're going to be okay." As we watched the cab drive away with Nate, I felt a profound sense of closure. The last lingering threads of my old life had been severed, and the future stretched out before us, bright and full of possibility. Later that night, as Ava slept peacefully, I sat on our porch, sipping tea and reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the struggles, the moments of doubt, they had all shaped me into the woman I was now. I thought of the women out there who might be where I was 5 years ago, trapped, afraid, doubting themselves. I wished I could tell them that there was hope, that they were stronger than they knew. As the stars twinkled above, I made a silent vow. I would use my voice, my experiences, to help others find their strength. My story wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving, about reclaiming one's power and dignity. Tomorrow, I decided I would start writing again. Not just articles, but a book. My story, raw and honest, a beacon of hope for others. The cool night breeze caressed my face, and I smiled. Life wasn't perfect, but it was beautifully, wonderfully mine. And for the first time in years, I was excited about what the future held. As I headed back inside, I paused at Ava's room, watching her sleep. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt had been worth it. For her, for me, for the life we'd built together. This wasn't just an ending. It was a new chapter, brimming with hope, strength, and the unshakable knowledge that we were going to be more than okay. We were going to be extraordinary.